Thank you everyone for joining this upskilling workshop with us. I'm like super excited for this tokenomics session with Ori. Hope you are so. Just kind of like quick reminder for everyone joining. If you want to leave questions during the session or like request to speak at the end, if you want to give some feedback or doubts, whatever, like there's an icon on the top right of the screen where you can request to speak, and then we'll give you the permissions. I think we can kick started. Thank you, Ori, for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Let me just give you a minute to finish getting set up here, and I'll get into it. All right. So we can just I'll open it up for conversation kind of as I go. So I'll get started, run through a few slides, and then can break for some discussion and questions, and then I can kind of continue on because I think I have too much content to really go through everything in detail. So I'll try to run through a few things that might be complex fairly quickly so that we can double click on them and go back in if anyone's interested on any points from before. So the way I structure this, I'm going to start kind of super high level and go into like more practical, tangible things later on in the presentation with high level idea here. Thinking about methodologies we can use, case studies we can use to do it effectively. And so I've been in the process for a few months now, taking a look at the entire design space and trying to figure out what are some basic principles and repeatable patterns that we can use to be better at doing mechanism design. Because ultimately, the big unlock of crypto protocols in most cases is this ability to coordinate around shared outcomes in a decentralized way, right? So we can do this. The blockchain layer itself, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, are examples of this kind of coordination. But I think what we're all more focused on is the applications that enables us to build on top of them. So using smart contracts on Ethereum, we can also create these decentralized coordination games to raise funds or to curate or to govern some shared set of resources. And so mostly we've seen this already starting to happen, in realms such as DeFi, art, and so finance, art, and more recently things like DeSci and refi or regen. So, but I think there's a underlying set of basic principles that has not been well articulated, and so many people are running into this sort of blind and sort of copying the latest thing that was tried. And so, yeah, that's why I said I've been focused on trying to dig deep into the space and understand what principles we can extract and what methodologies we can extract. And I can't say I'm finished yet. Like, definitely there's a lot more work to do, but I'll give you like a rundown of what I've found. So yeah, I think at a high level, what excites me about blockchain and crypto is that it's really this new playground. It's this new medium for experimenting with political systems, with economic systems in a way that we have not been able to before. So previously, we had this great platform on top of the internet called the web that allowed us to experiment at the information layer. So we could experiment with these new formats for communication, for circulating information. And so we had this whole explosion of really new one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many formats for information circulation. So we have wikis, blogs, discussion forums, all these like qualitatively new formats for people to communicate, to share media, right? And this has been the big focus of quote unquote tech, of the tech industry over the last 25 years. But now with the advent of Bitcoin and then Ethereum, we have this new playground that we can use the internet for, this new platform on top of the internet called blockchain or the interchain or crypto, where we can now play with value. We can now experiment with new formats for transacting with one another, not just sharing media, but sharing value. And so from this, we're starting to get these new formats for value circulation. We have ways of streaming payments where before we could only send discrete payments. We have digital credentials. We have jurisdictionless property titles. We have different representations of people's reputation in trusted portable ways that can be used for credit. We have airdrops, right? So we have this whole new world that's emerging from this new platform that the world has been able to bootstrap on top of the internet.
So, right. So, I guess kind of one question comes to mind is, so what? Like, other than experimentation and innovation for its own sake, like, what does this actually mean at a broader level? And so this is super high level and like deep historical view, and we don't have to stay on it for too long. But I think that this is why it's exciting, kind of beyond the Web3 narrative of, oh, this is the latest iteration of the web. I think there's actually a bigger story here, which is like the whole evolution of our society, of our economy, of like the macro political structure. So I think the way I like to think about it is this oversimplified view of like maybe 3 stages, maybe that have played out in the last 1,000 years, from feudal systems where everything's based on agriculture and it's very hierarchical and based on like religious rights. And then we have the industrial era, which has been the last like 300 to 500 years, which we have the factory and everything's based on law and the social contract underlying it. We have nation states, corporations, bureaucracy. And then really in the last 50 years, we've started accelerating into the digital age, right? We have the computer. We have things organized through more sophisticated commons protocols. Code is actually the underlying driver of how systems are organized, and we don't have like these contracts with our governments, but we have these overlapping opt-in relationships with networks. And so I think we're very at the early innings of this. The internet and the computer, the personal computer, the database were kind of some of the first steps, and then with the web and social media and now crypto, you can see them as the latest steps on this bigger macro transition. And so I think crypto was really the critical missing piece to make this transition start to happen at the economic and political layer. Because if you even think about Web 2 and like Uber and Airbnb and Facebook and Google, at the end of the day, they labeled like novel new forms of interaction at the social layer and also in our economic relationships with each other. But they themselves are still of the old system. They are still industrial era corporations embedded in nation states with bureaucratic governance. And so their operating system is ultimately the same. I think crypto is the first thing that really like gets us all the way to the bottom of the stack. But we're just at the beginning of this new medium, this new design space. So it's very unknown what this new age will look like. And I think there's a broader kind of set of things that are happening in technology and food, energy, manufacturing that are also like decentralizing the way that we coordinate. Okay, so back to tokenomics. Let's get into the specifics of one of this kind of these tools we now have because of crypto, because of smart contracts. So I'm gonna run through a schema I use for thinking about token design, which is really these 3 dimensions of what a token is and what options you have for how to use tokens. And so the 3 dimensions are tokenization, how are units in a system represented, in a digital system represented, and then how are those units allocated, and then how are those units used? What do you use those units for? And so you can think of distribution as like supply side, utilities, demand side, and tokenization is prior to those because it's actually how you represent the units. And any one system might have more than one token. It might have different kinds of units for different purposes. But this is the kind of matrix I use for thinking about the types of tokens we can design. So most people just think about the top left quadrant when they hear the word token. They think, oh, token, that's like uni token or like Bitcoin or like even shares in a company or currency units, right? So there are these completely freely tradable and completely fungible units. every one unit is like every other unit. You know, my 0.01 Bitcoin is like your 0.01 Bitcoin. So that's what fungibility is, this exchangeability between units. And tradability obviously just means, you know, no one can prevent me from handing you $1 or from me transferring you a uni token, right? So this is useful for things like currencies, and also for shares, economic units, in you know, public kind of utilities that are governed through token voting. Potentially, that also could be perverse. But anyways, that's what those are typically used for. Then we have, if you go to the top right, we have units that are fungible, but they're not tradable. They're not, you can't just transfer them. So this is like your karma on Reddit, or maybe your credit score, or your Uber rating. And this I'm calling reputation, but this is basically what people now are calling soul-bound tokens, SBTs. So it's associated with your account, and you earn it through participation in some system, and actually means something about what you've done, what your account has done. And now going to the bottom, we have both tradable and non-tradable, non-fungible tokens. So of course, when people think NFTs, the first thing they think of is the bottom left. So completely tradable NFTs. I can sell it on OpenSea to anyone, or I can just send it to anyone. And so the ENS addresses are a great example of this, where they use NFT as the data structure title, because it's like a property title. This is like my ownership deed of my ENS domain. Or you could use it to represent off-chain stuff. Like you could have an NFT that represents title to a property, to a house. Of course, you can have things that are totally don't have utility themselves, but are, you know, status symbols, like the apes or what have you. And then on the bottom right, this is what people are now calling SBT NFTs, so soul-bound, non-fungible tokens. Before, you know, I was just calling them like non-tradable NFTs. But this is something like a POAP, or like your passport, where it is unique. Every one has a unique serial number like associated with it, but it's not tradable. So this is like your passport. You can't just give your passport to someone else and it still has the same validity. It belongs to you, and it's also unique. Great. So this is the matrix, and I would say it's also a spectrum. You can have designs where there's limited tradability, where maybe trading is limited to a certain allow list, or you can only transfer it after a certain amount of time. So, and then also would say fungibility is a spectrum as well. You even have a semi-fungible token standard. You can have things that convert between being non-fungible and fungible. You know, we can get into that later. So now let's get into supply side. So, okay, we have your units. Now, how do those units actually get out there? And I would say this is definitely like a narrow view, but yeah, I'm working kind of towards a more general description here. But basically, what we've seen with projects so far is this kind of view of your initial supply, which when the token is launched, there's people that have already done work. And so these would be like the employees or the workers or the contributors. And then maybe you have your users, people who have actually used the service or are partnered with the community. And then people who have pre-purchased the tokens, people who have invested in the project. And then over time, you also have the ability to distribute tokens either algorithmically, like through, for example, liquidity mining, or in dOrg, we have the token is earned as you do work. As you earn USDC, you're mining the token. And then also you can issue tokens basically through governance, like instead of algorithmically, through actual decisions. And you don't have to have both of these, of course. You can have, you know, quote unquote fair launches, or tokens that only have a supply over time. They don't have an initial distribution. And now we have the question of what are these tokens actually used for, right? And so earlier we gave some examples, like maybe the uni token is used to govern that system and eventually share revenue or profits from it. So that would be a token with economic and governance qualities to it. But you also have tokens that have different access rights. Like if, let's say you have, you know, at this point we're all probably pretty familiar with like tokens, like community tokens or social tokens, where having the token lets you enter private spaces of a community. But you don't just have access. That's the last one here. So content event forms, but you also have other types of access. Like maybe to use a service, you need the token, or maybe in terms of work opportunities to provide services on a network and earn an income from it, you need the token. So this is what's known as work tokens or staking tokens. Even Ethereum has this quality where, you need, in order to access the yields, the inflation and the transaction fees of Ethereum, you stake ETH to be 32 ETH to be a node, and that gives you access to that ability to do that work, the validation work, and to earn the revenue. But we also have this at the application layer as well, with models where you need the token to do some work for the network. And so the last point I want to make here is that in the previous model, we basically had like before crypto, we had the ability to have tokens or units that had governance and economic rights, right? Like shares in a company, for example. But access was never really part of the equation, because it's hard to track. If units are represented in various databases, it's hard to universally track and grant access to different elements of a system based on tokens. Maybe I'll pause there and just see quickly if we have any thoughts on or questions on what we've gone through so far.
I think so far so good, or you're kind of like conveying all the concepts like really clearly.
Great, yeah, I'll power ahead. So this is from the context of thinking about tokens, but actually tokens, I think of them really as the components of a system. They're units that can drive incentives and that can represent contributions of various types, and that can grant like access of various types. But there's a design space beyond tokens, which is the kind of mechanisms that these systems use, which may or may not involve the tokens, but basically they create the dynamics of how the actors in a system or in a game interact with one another, and how the tokens kind of factor into those. And so basically what I'm saying is I think if you just look at the tokens, you're not actually seeing the full picture. So I don't have I'll go into like a more rigorous perhaps kind of schema for thinking about this later, but I think the best way to start is to just go through examples. So really understanding what you can do with smart contracts to mediate these kind of like new types of transactions that we can do together. So one example I really like, I think the project's actually defunct now, but it was running for a while. It was a cool project that people would use at different like Ethereum community events. It was called Kickback. And basically they had this nice mechanism for solving the problem of event attendance. So the problem, you throw a free event, you only have capacity for 50 people, but because it's free, a bunch of people sign up and no one shows up. So you either let more than 50 people sign up and risk overbooking the venue, or you let 50 people show up, but a good amount won't show up, and so you'll have empty capacity. And so the clever mechanism design here to solve that is the staking game, where in order to come to the event and keep it free, people have to stake tokens, and then if they show up, they get their tokens back, and if they don't show up, they get slashed. And the tokens of everyone who didn't show up can be redistributed back to the ones that did show up, or it can go to the event organizers. And so this is really simple. It doesn't involve it involves tokens, but no new token. You would just use like USDC or DAI or Matic or ETH for this. But I think it's a really nice mechanism that follows this kind of stake and slash pattern. In this case, you're not even doing work. You're just making a commitment and staking on that commitment. And then that drives the behavior that will like increase the turnout for the event or decrease the amount of unused capacity of an event. Another example that uses stake and slash in this way is Mochi, which is a protocol for basically making kind of commitments to work to changes that you want to make, like in your habits. So you kind of get grouped with a group of like, let's say 4 people, and you each have, I'm going to do 50 push-ups every day. And then you are committing that you're doing that, or sending evidence that you do that thing. And if you don't keep up your commitment, then other people in the group who act as the oracle kind of would get you slashed. And so you can imagine like very fun and playful or very serious kind of like use cases for this type of mechanism. Another one that has grown in popularity a lot in the last year from Nouns is the continuous auction. So this is the idea of funding a project or a community off of a running auction that repeats continuously for the governance right of that project. And so in the case of Nouns, every single day, automatically, there's a new auction for a Nouns NFT. And so there's only going to be 365 of these NFTs minted every year. It's just one is minted per day. And every day, anyone can buy it. And once you buy it, the money goes into the Nouns treasury. And then the Nouns NFT holders collectively govern that treasury, right? One NFT, one vote. And that's a very bare bones generic mechanism. And basically the idea is that you could apply this type of approach to continuously raising funds and then distributing your governance rights to any sort of project. So, and I think they basically created a platform after this. At first, Nouns just, was kind of a meta project that's just, we're going to fund things that promote the Nouns brand. So they funded lots of things with all the money that they got that, in their case, I guess were aimed at making the NFT itself more valuable and like creating the value around the access to that community. But then there's been other spin-offs from that because they made code for launching Nouns type auctions very easy to use, and even built a user interface around it. So yeah, there's been lots of other Nouns like DAOs that use the same mechanism. And so this is a combination, let's say, of fundraising and governance. And you can imagine, they could even use those Nouns like NFTs or DAOs could even use those Nouns tokens that they're selling as claims on goods. So you could say, okay, you buy the NFT, and then if you have that NFT, you can use it, you can burn it to attend the annual event, or you can hold on to it, and as long as you hold on to it, you have access to certain events or something like that. Another cool mechanism are Hypercerts. Is basically tokenized impact certificates. So this is a mechanism for public goods funding where you mint this basically NFT that you did something that you think is valuable, like usually something for the public good or for the good of some particular community or network. And then, maybe no one's willing to pay you for that at that moment, but you've minted the representation that you've done the thing. And then in the future, if there's a funder who's interested in encouraging work on a particular ecosystem, your Hypercert could be bought from you retrospectively. So this is basically, if you have this happening in like a repeated fashion, then you can have a whole market created around public goods works. So, and then you could even have financing off of this. So for example, let's say like people know in a particular ecosystem, there's really reliable retrospective funding. Like for example, in Optimism, they've committed a large amount of money to retrospective funding, or even in Ethereum, the DAO Drops project is an example of retrospective funding. And so what you can do is people could fund public work that they want to do from prospective funders who are profit motivated, who finance them in order to get their Hypercert in expectation that in the future a retrospective funder will buy it back. And so this could solve kind of like a cold start problem for public goods works that are that have startup costs that aren't small and just involving work on the side for someone. Yeah, another cool one I'll highlight is Nexus Mutual. It's been running for a pretty long time, and it's this pretty sophisticated market for buying cover on risk. In this case, smart contract hack risk, kind of depegging risk of protocols. And so they have this whole sophisticated protocol for getting the NXM token and then staking it to evaluate the risk of certain events happening. And then people can buy cover on those events. Basically, like let's say you're you have a lot of money in Yearn earning yield. So let's say you have like $10,000 there. Maybe you buy insurance on that, like for $500 or $100, and so you're insuring against any smart contract issue that's had there. And the Nexus Mutual Protocol handles all of the flows of incentives and tokens to guarantee that risk, to underwrite that risk. I think this is the last example I have. This is purely on the governance side. So this is in 1inch, kind of a cool governance mechanism called instant governance, where instead of voting yes, no on changes to certain values of the protocol, like let's say the decay time on the governance or the referral reward of people referring their friends to 1inch and getting a rev share, or the fee on swapping. So basically, instead of these parameters being set like manually through yes, no governance votes, they're set in real time by token staking. So there's you can stake your tokens on the value you think the parameter should be, and then the smart contract aggregates those and sets it in real time to the token weighted median of what all the stakers want the value to be. So I think this is a great example of the direction governance is going to go, which is more algorithmic, tightly scoped governance versus what we see today, which is more like open-ended, non-algorithmic, discrete yes/no governance. Yeah, so that's all my examples. Now I'll finish off with something that's very work in progress that I've been working on, amongst kind of other materials that I'm hoping to put out, which is like a mechanism design canvas. So this is modeled off of the business model canvas, and someone turned the business model canvas, I think 10 years ago, into like a game design canvas, basically for video games and things like that. And then I took that and I'm trying to apply it to cryptoeconomic games. So basically thinking about these different pieces of the mechanism design pipeline and how you can think in a way about the different levers you have to drive the behavior you want to see as the overall outcome of whatever you're designing. So this is one dimension to how you might do game design or mechanism design with tokens. I'll run through it very quickly, and then I can kind of show you some other things that I've been working on that are related before going into questions. But yeah, so the idea here is that from left to right, you think about the platform, and this is kind of iterative, so you always can kind of go back and look holistically at how to change the different pieces. But if we're just kind of going quickly in order as like a first iteration, you might decide which platforms you need, smart contract platforms, storage networks, to actually build on. That's like the tech. And then you want to combine the right mechanisms with the right components. So I was talking earlier about how tokens and the different variations thereof are these kind of components, and then you put them into motion with mechanisms of various sorts. And so after you have a basic design for that, you can think about how that will play out in real time, basically as the dynamics of the system, which are unpredictable to a certain degree, but you can kind of anticipate them. But then also, this is meant to be a framework for doing experiments. So you can see how the dynamics play out in either a simulation or in a pilot, experiment, testnet, and then iterate from there. But then ultimately, what you want your dynamics to result in is some sort of impact, right? So there should be some impact of playing the game on the players, right? So this is kind of the endogenous impact that the system has, on the people playing the game, or the organizations that are meant to be affected by the game. And then also there could be externalities of the game, positive or negative, right? So maybe actually the bigger goal of the game you're designing is some impact on climate or on public safety or security of other networks, of other systems. And so you can look at those externalities, and then these could also be negative externalities. The easiest one to think about is maybe Bitcoin's climate impact. And then all the way on the right is the players. So who's actually like involved in this? What are actual organizations and humans? What are the different profiles? And yeah, you can think about this left to right or right to left, because from left to right is how the system designer experiences the game, it's like you're close to the tech, you're close to the mechanisms, and the players are kind of far away. So the players just experience the impact, right? And maybe the externalities. But then they're further away from the actual mechanisms. They don't necessarily know the mechanisms. They know the impact, and then they could kind of maybe look deeper and back solve into the mechanism. So I think it's nice to think from these different perspectives. And at the bottom we have basically how do you bootstrap the game, like what's needed in terms of raising funds perhaps, or generating revenue early on, and then what is needed economically to sustain the system. So yeah, every system is going to have some set of costs in some form or another. So how are those accounted for? Is there some sort of revenue or token demand, or donations or anything else that's driving the continued cost of maintaining the game? And yeah, this is very early. Like I still need to come up with the examples for a lot more of these, but it's just another example of how you could think about tokenomics and crypto game design. I'll jump to something else before breaking for more questions, which is the Mechanism Institute is the umbrella that I've been using to kind of aggregate this research and bring together the right people to work on it. And so the first thing that we put out is this library of mechanism primitives. And so this is largely from what I was talking about before, is the different kinds of mechanisms and also the components. And so still working on improving the categories and putting more detailed explanation into each of the mechanism. But basically, we have them tagged by different types, like governance, where you could go in and then see, okay, what is this mechanism? How has it been used in the past? Where are some places I can go to learn about implementations of this in the past? So I'll try to find a good example. Maybe Harburger tax is this cool one where we have a short description of it, we have a longer explanation of how it works, and we're working to kind of, like I said, get a lot more details into each one of these so people can really understand how it works well, what doesn't work well about it, what it's for, and then resources to learn more about it, and then example implementations, links to websites, code, etc. And so shout out to Colin for the design on this, and also been working with Elio on the implementation of this site, and with Juan on a potential AI experience to use a bot that's trained on the library to help you solve mechanism design problems. But that is in the works, and I'll stop there. Thanks.
Awesome. Congratulations for all this work, Ori. I really like the potential of Mechanism Institute. So are there any questions for Ori? Feel free to kind of request to speak on the top right corner. Yep. Go ahead.
Hello, mic check.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, Jim, and I think that was a pretty insightful conversation, and thank you very much. So, talking of tokenomics, I think one of the things that I have personally been thinking about is the way the crypto ecosystem is connected, and at the root, if you take it from the node level, where the more node a blockchain have, the more decentralized it kind of is. If we apply that into tokenomics, where we are looking to unlock new economic models that are more interconnected, I am curious on your opinion on how tokenomics can be used to unlock markets for certain part of the world, right? For example, if you look at crypto adoption and the real impact of crypto, it is skewed towards the global south, right? So you look at the real impact, the real use cases, it's more impactful in those part of the world. But if you look at the market and the monetary side of things, it's in the global south, right? So how do we create tokenomic models that, in a way, for the global south, it unlocks access to the global west market, and for the global west, it unlocks the impact the global south. Thank you. That's my
Yeah, I think that's a really big, important, and difficult question. So definitely I've thought about this a lot, and this I think we can try to address with the way that we go about the design process, and kind of take inspiration from maybe some like academic disciplines that have done a good job of basically being accessible, collaborative, and run alongside between the West and the global South. So yeah, one thing that comes to mind is designing these like political economic models, co-designing them with like communities that need the impact. Like you're saying, these kinds of like new economic models are going to have the biggest like impact for global South. So that's where, like, let's say they're needed more. But then like most of the people, let's say, that are working on it, and most of the kind of capital is going into use cases that are not focused there. So we have this like misalignment problem, and I don't think the mechanisms themselves can fix that. I think that needs to be something with the people doing the design and where they're targeting their efforts. Like, it needs to happen at that layer, at the social coordination layer, amongst the people like deciding what to work on and kind of attracting capital or talent to work on those problems. So but I mean, I'm optimistic because I think that a lot of times in those environments, like in different global South places, maybe there's more room for experimentation. Maybe like the institutions there are more willing to be open to alternative approaches. And so yeah, that's why I think we really need to have this like really robust, decentralized global network of people working on this stuff that have a shared vision of what it can enable and how we should work on getting there. Because then we can all support each other when people are going and talking to their local institutions in different places and trying to run pilots. They can be supported by the best people around the world in doing that. Yeah, so that's kind of my long-winded answer that that I'm really not sure, but I agree that that's kind of one of the big things we should be thinking about.
Yeah, lovely answer. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually one quick thing I'll add there is the big thing about crypto and the internet generally is the ability to like leverage the crowd towards, specific areas where help is needed, right? So, we have like kind of silly examples of this, like Constitution DAO, where, thousands of people around the world put in money to raise $35 million to buy a copy of the US Constitution. But, you could also have these kind of asymmetric, high leverage, like catalysts around, problems in areas where usually there isn't attention or the ability to rally such support from people around the world. And it doesn't have to be just these big flashy moments, but also in small ways. Like, if like $10 to $12 can be raised from thousands of people towards addressing or setting up some system in a community, in a small community of a couple thousand or a couple tens of thousands of people somewhere in the global South, then yeah, that's something that was just very difficult to do before, with all the middlemen that would be involved with payment processing and all the tracking and all the trust that would need to be baked into the cost of marshaling those resources. So yeah, I think crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, are mechanisms that can help have these impacts in these targeted ways from people around the world. Like one quick example from, let's say, the web era of this, that has nothing to do with money, but it was an example of like rallying the attention of people around the world to address something in the global south. I think it's like a interesting example was I think it was like January 1, 1994, when like the Zapatistas in Chiapas in Mexico like had a standoff. Like everyone thought for sure that like based on previous actions that the Mexican government would just kind of like bomb them or destroy them for this like resistance, this uprising. But because of the internet and the Zapatistas like web savviness, they were able to get like activist groups from around the world to reach out to the Mexican government and in support of them. And so all of a sudden they were shocked, like, whoa, this like random small group and this one place in Mexico has this support from people around the world, like, holy shit. And so then they backed off and Zapatistas won. And so I think these kinds of events are inspiring for what we could do with crypto. And now it's not just about attention and social pressure, but it'll also be marshaling resources.
Yeah, no, like I totally agree. I think it even happened I think 2 years ago in Nigeria, where there was this like massive social unrest where the government basically blocked Twitter, blocked payment channels, and there was like a huge social coordination where Bitcoin was sent to a lot of the protesters and basically people who needed help. So I think the conversation around the social layer is kind of like it's like really, really interesting and very important in like these tokenomics designs. I think that the systems usually could be like credibly neutral, but the social layer always sometimes have a lot of like challenges. Some are just basically like biases, some are just like coordination failures. So yeah, I think we have come. I would say that we've come quite far ahead with like the mechanisms, the protocol layers. I think the social layer is a place that perhaps we could explore more, right? Because you could see that genuine project or genuine impact projects from the global south don't get like the same backing that friends from like the west would get, even though sometimes you could look at the impact and clearly say that okay, this is more impactful than this, but sometimes I don't know, I think like there are a couple of biases over there. So I'm keen on like hearing your opinion too on that, and in designing some of these tokenomic models, how we can like deliberately build some of these anti-bias systems into them at the social level.
Yeah, no, thanks for all the thoughts. I mean, I agree with you on the challenges. I don't have much more to say on the solutions. I could riff on more mechanisms that I think people should look into. But yeah, basically, I think we need more kind of mechanisms that are sustainable, that these projects can use, and then attract attention, attract support on that basis, rather than attracting support just on the basis of the ethics of why this is needed. Yeah, so one that I'll just throw out really quickly is currencies. So the idea of creating tracking and capacity for people to help one another in local communities through basically like a ledger of mutual obligations, instead of using exogenous money, instead of using fiat or Bitcoin, using a currency that's created on demand as people have needs. And so this way people can like orchestrate production within their community with less need for liquidity. So there's a lot of interesting work that's been happening there. People call that CoFi, like collaborative finance. And there's projects like Resource Protocol, Resource Finance, Informal Systems, Circles UBI, and Ncoin, and others that have been kind of working on that. So I think that's a cool one where it's like a really many steps removed solution from what we in terms of raising money instead of a new way to create money.
Thank you. And we also have one question from Andy. Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you, Claire. Really appreciate it. Hey, Ori, first of all, amazing presentation. Really like it. A really big fan of the Mechanism Institute. So just quick question. It seems like right now the Mechanism Institute is collecting examples of how specific protocols might be kind of in a way instantiating that mechanism. Is there a plan to potentially bring that mechanism into a cleaner standard and then other DAOs can leverage?
Yeah, so right now, like you said, we're at the stage of just collecting the data and making it easily accessible, including code snippets. And then through doing that, I mean, I wouldn't call it standard, but we're kind of evolving the format for how each mechanism gets presented, so you can understand the benefits of it, the drawbacks, parameters, like key parameters, and implications of setting them to different values. So in that way, just creating standardization around the way that people think about mechanisms and then the process for composing them. And then I think there's some really cool projects out there already that are trying to build like clean standards or reference implementations of those mechanisms. So we would just like link out to those. OpenZeppelin's an obvious one that's been out there, you know, since the beginning, kind of since like 2016, I think, that does a good job of that. But then there's also like newer approaches to that that people are working on. So yeah, I think we're not so much into standards in terms of Mechanism Institute, more just like practical usefulness. And then, but we are taking it like further than just collecting and presenting this mapping of the design space. We're also looking to like advance the actual way that people do mechanism design and the mechanisms that are out there. So through mapping, we can see where the missing piece and also work like hands-on, one-on-one with different protocols to discover more deeply what the problems are that we need new mechanism design to solve. So so part of the whole approach with the Institute is one this open resource, but then also focused research that we're starting to do with partners on creating new mechanisms that address areas that the current set don't, and new ways to like recombine and compose the mechanisms here to be a part of solving that. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's honestly just aggregating all that information and giving a name to kind of the big recurrent pattern already kind of helps. The other thing that I think would be super interesting at some point is, besides having the snippets of specific smart contracts, is also having some way of standardizing the way you simulate this for tokenomics design. So if you kind of know what pattern you're using and you kind of already can grab something that can simulate part of it, then tokenomics designs becomes a lot faster and I think a lot more accurate. But that's way longer down the road, I guess.
No, that's really good feedback. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of work with the people that have already gone further down that rabbit hole than I, with standardizing those pieces and seeing how we could be part of creating the pipeline for people to do the design process more easily. And we've even thought about how the bot that we're working on can be part of that, can basically learn from the implementations and the context around the implementations, how well they work for what, to actually just end to end give you the code, right? And so for that, it'd be useful to have these reference implementations and these standard interfaces for abstracting between them to make that actually work well.
Super cool. Super cool. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
Awesome. So any more questions from the audience? We have like a couple more minutes if anybody wants to add something. Yeah, otherwise I think we can wrap it up here. Thank you, Ori. This was like really interesting. I'm just thinking about like how can people, like they see this presentation, they want to kind of like reach out the Mechanism Institute or be in contact with you somehow, which are like the channels if you want to kind of like announce them as well.
Yeah, definitely. So we have like a Twitter that's not very active that you can check out to follow, because that's where we'll actually like announce things. And then also there's the form on the website for getting involved, so you can kind of check off how you're interested to be involved, and then we'll reach out. You can also just message me directly. Right now we want to have, the main thing that we're looking for is maybe someone to help with our socials, so just comms and this kind of thing, and then also researchers that can contribute to the library. So we want to kind of build a network of people that understand this stuff well enough to continuously be out there feeding new implementation examples into the library, and then also expanding on what we've started to do with the description of the mechanisms. So like I was saying with that template, so basically going through and actually writing the full page for each of the mechanisms. Yeah, just thanks so much, Clara, for organizing this, and to everyone here.
Yeah, thank you for this super like clear explanation of the tokenomics and the different mechanism designs. Thank you everyone for joining in, and we are going to publish this session on our YouTube channels, your YouTube channels, so it can be like up for everybody who wants to really listen to it or kind of like catch up with any part that they miss. Thank you. We'll see each other in the next upskilling workshop.